Miriam Cates is a Conservative parliamentary candidate who in the course of the last parliament has been raising this issue repeatedly. Miriam, good to talk to you this afternoon. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. Why is it so important, before we come on to what's going wrong and what we might do about it, why does this matter so much? Why should people care?
Well, I think there are two big reasons why this is so important. I think the first reason you've summed up really well in your introduction, which is that we need enough babies being born each year and then going into the workplace when they're 18, let's say, to replace the people that are leaving the workplace and taking a pension. So back in the 1970s, there were about 4 working age people for each pensioner. So 4 working age people paying taxes for pensions and healthcare and care and those kind of things. Now there are 3 working age people for each pensioner. By the end of my life, we'll probably be down to 2 to 1. So every person who's of working age already is going to have to pay double, let's say, in tax in order to be able to support the ageing population. So that's the economic impact. And that's why, of course, people are saying, and I completely agree, that the welfare state just can't be sustained if we continue with this demographic model. So it's an economic problem to start with, labour shortages, inflation, all those kind of things. But the second one, it is a social problem, really, and a very emotional one, because I did a poll last year that showed that 92% of young women say they want children. On average, they want 2.3 children, so between 2 and 3 children. And yet around 30% of today's young women, sadly, on the current trajectory, won't have children at all. Now, that is an enormous source of personal sadness for people. Never mind the economic costs for the country. That is a huge source of personal sadness. People looking back over their lives and saying, I wish I'd had a family. And I think that is reason in itself, even if it wasn't an economic problem as well, to actually look at how do we remove the barriers that stop people from having the families they say they want. Of course, the 8% of people who don't want children, of course that's absolutely fine. They should never, ever feel any pressure to do so. But the fact is that most people do. And so we should be building a society where it's easier to have children, more affordable to have children, and more culturally acceptable to have children, all those kind of things, so that people have that fulfilment of being able to raise the next generation.
Miriam, if we accept, well, let's start with that. Do you accept that a lot of this, perhaps the vast majority of it, is people wanting to have kids who simply can't afford to? It's not about lifestyle choices, it's just money.
That is definitely a big factor. I think house prices are a big issue. And also, our tax system in this country is completely unfavourable to families in a way that it actually isn't in comparable countries like France and Germany and America, where families just pay less tax in recognition of the fact that they are bringing up the next generation. So that absolutely needs to change. So economics is a big part. I think people are leaving it later, which, of course, there's nothing objectively wrong with that at all. But if you do leave it later, sadly, just the fact of women's fertility means that you will be less likely to have children. So it used to be normal to have children in your early 20s, a couple of generations ago. Now, for the first time last year, most women reach 30 without having had a child. And it's just statistically more likely for people to suffer with infertility if they wait till later. So that's a factor as well. But what's really, really interesting, if you dig down in the statistics, is that actually if a woman has 1 child, she's pretty much as likely to go on to have 2 or 3 or 4 as she was in the 70s. So the size of families hasn't changed so much. What's changed is the number of women who never have that first child. And that's what's driving down the birth rate. Right,
so it's not that women in general having fewer children, it's that fewer women are having children at all.
Exactly, that's exactly it.
Isn't this another consequence of government after government over decades, really, deprioritising and neglecting policies that will help the young when it comes to housing, when it comes to skills, when it comes to training? I could go on. Young people have been neglected. They're paying extortionate amounts just to live in insecure accommodation that they could be turfed out at any point. And now we're all demanding why they're not having more children.
Well, that is certainly true and a part of it, and I don't disagree with that. But if you look around the world, this is a fact. This declining birth rate is a fact in all Western countries except Israel. Every single Western country has a declining birth rate. And if you look at countries that we in the UK think of as much more pro-natal, pro-family, like Finland, let's say, or the Scandinavian countries, they actually have worse birth rates than us. So although government policy is a factor, house prices and economy are a factor, they're clearly not everything, because this is a Western malaise. And actually, it's not just a Western malaise anymore. And a recent study in the Lancet showed that by the end of this century, there will only be 5 countries in the entire world with an above replacement birth rate. So this is a worldwide problem. Yes, there are local factors. The government could do more, but there's something more to it than just that.
And what do you think that is? Because if you do accept, if it's not just about financial pressure, if it's about choice, we can't force people, if we can't force those women that perhaps would have had children but now don't want to, we can't force them to have kids. So what do we do about it, Miriam?
Well, that is a great question. And I suppose my overall answer would be we should try everything. Because this is clearly a massive problem. We can already see the problems in our economy because of falling birth rates. But I think firstly it is to change the culture so that we have a pro-family, pro-children attitude, that we see parenthood as something that's a huge service to society, rather than seeing having children as something that's, private and you should only do it if you can afford to and it's fully your responsibility. And if you look at how we've socialised the cost of old age care, of course there are problems with it, but we essentially accept now that when you get to old age, to retirement, you will get a pension, you will get hospital care, you will get cared for, whether or not you have children. So we've socialised the cost of old age, but we've completely privatised the cost of having children. We don't help at all. And the culture that creates is one where it doesn't promote parenthood. It doesn't promote the kind of societal benefits of it. So I think we need a massive culture change to start with. But also we need to stop filling young people with doom about the future, because having children is a sign of hope, isn't it? You have children if you have hopefulness about the future, if you believe that your kids are going to have a good life.
But if probably not. A lot of them won't, because that's the society we've created. That's the life that young people are having to live, Miriam.
Well, potentially. But if you think about what will happen now, if you are a young person born now, you are actually going to be in huge demand. Your labour is going to be in huge demand because of the way demographics are changing. Now, of course, every generation has significant challenges, and this generation certainly has them. But if you think about our children are being brought up on a diet of doom on social media, whether that's about global warming or how difficult their lives are going to be, I'm not surprised that young people don't have the hopefulness that makes them think about starting a family, because that is a factor too. It's not just the economics. People say things like about global warming and things like that. So of course, we've got to be realistic, and we should be telling the truth about the world's problems. But there are good things happening in the world as well as bad things happening in the world.
There are, for sure.
And I think we need hopefulness.
Miriam, just lastly, text has come in from Gareth in Wilmslow that I want to put to you. Ben, he says, this future population depletion sounds incredibly serious. If only we had lots of driven immigrants wanting to come here to fill the gap and contribute to the economy. There is another solution to this problem to an extent, and that is an increase in immigration. And in the short term, that is probably going to have to be the solution, Miriam, isn't it?
Well, it sounds like a solution on paper, but actual total population is not really important in this argument. It is about the demographic split. And if immigrants come in at a particular age, they still get older. And birth rates among first-generation immigrants, for example, are not significantly higher than they are amongst people who've been here for generations. So it doesn't actually solve the problem. Immigrants get old too. And that's why we've seen that even though we've had a huge amount of immigration over the last few years, driven in part by labour shortages, we haven't actually seen the kind of economic growth that you would have seen had it been young people.
Isn't it contradictory on the one hand to be warning that we've got a shortage of all these jobs that need filling, and then say we need fewer of the young people who want to come here and fill them?
No, because if somebody comes to this country, an adult, they might fulfil one job, but they will need a house. They may bring dependents with them. They will use services. When a baby is born, you don't buy a new house. Yeah, you have baby doesn't need particularly an awful lot of money spent on it until it's much later on. So what we're looking for is a stable population where one baby is born for every person turning 50. That is a stable population. Immigration doesn't do that, unfortunately. It just puts more pressure on services and housing. And also, as I said earlier on, almost every country in the world now is facing decreasing birth rates. There's a very limited amount of time left when there will be, if you like, spare population in other parts of the world to come here. So the West is not going to have the pull factor for much longer that's going to drive the kind of levels of immigration that we've seen over recent years, even if there was demographic consent for it. And I think we know that there isn't.
Interesting. Very interesting, Miriam. Thank you for coming on. Miriam Cates, Conservative parliamentary candidate.